Hello and welcome to the second episode of James Bond Television. And I have somebody here that I admires for a long time. And this guy is being very helpful to me because the graphic you see right here, the intro you saw is the brainchild of this man right here, the one and only Joseph Darlington of Being James Bond. Welcome, my friend.
Oh, what's up, brother? Finally on James Bond television. That's how you know that you've made it.
Well, have you seen too many ladies here walking around? And
Seriously,
well,
best Instagram, best Facebook on the internet.
Jesus, the funny thing is that I'm not the one who put those things because I'm a married guy.
Yeah.
I got
Okay.
somebody else. I got somebody else to do
Ah.
that. Yeah.
Plot twist. Okay.
Plot twist. Yeah. There's so many people think that Wilfred. I like to put. Hey, we like the ladies, but we are married guys, so
There you go.
we have to do this the right way. How's married life treating you? Welcome to the club.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, boy, long time coming. 53 years old, finally taking the plunge. But it's treating me very well. Very happy. And my wife's daughter had a baby in the middle of December, so we are.
Oh,
Yeah,
congratulations!
thank you. So we're also recently grandparents too. So yeah. So the white I couldn't the white in the beard. It's starting to show. So but yeah, no, all is well. I genuinely, honestly couldn't be happier. I'm almost surprised, just how. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be, but you get the jitters going in. But honestly,
Yeah.
everything has just been spectacular. So
No,
very
that's
happy.
great. That's
Yeah,
great, man. That's great, man.
thank
And
you.
this is kind of about payback interview, and I'm going to explain this because a couple of years ago, Joseph interviewed me, so I
Yep.
had to do a payback interview. So this is the one.
Very cool.
I today on route that took years in the making, thinking about it, and let's
Nice,
do this
nice.
the nice way. We're finally going to do this. Joseph, tell us, if you please, because this is James Bond television, and we're gonna talk about how you became a Bond fan through television.
Mm,
Because let's do justice to the name of the TV show
there you
here,
go.
the YouTube show, whatever.
Mhm.
What was your first experience on television watching a James Bond film?
That's an easy one because it actually was first and foremost on television that I actually saw a James Bond film, and that would be For Your Eyes Only. Um, that one I was about 12 or 13. And For Your Eyes Only was being shown on TV. It was on cable. And, back then, once something landed on cable, they just played it over and over.
Yes.
Um, so I saw that plenty of times. So yeah, that was my first kind of Bond. My first intro to James Bond was just on the small screen. Um, it would be the following summer that Octopussy would come out, and I would be like, "Oh, James
Oh,
Bond, that's the thing. I got to see this new James Bond movie," and that's sort of where it really took off. And then, of course, the year after that took, in those days, it took about a year
hmm,
for a film to end up on cable, and sure enough, that was just round the clock. It was always on, and every time it was on, I'd be watching it. So really, my big experience with Bond is absolutely on the small screen.
do you have a VCR back then? Do you record those films on the VCR?
Yes, I did, and I probably now that you mention it, I know that I had Octopussy. I had it recorded and probably watched it many times on the VCR also, and I can still remember the actual tape, and I can still see my handwriting Octopussy on the label. Um, so yeah, in fact, I'm almost positive that it was Octopussy, something else, and then I'm pretty positive Flash Gordon. was also on that same tape.
with
Because
Timothy Dalton.
yeah, yes, ironically. Because if you remember back in those days when you could, there was like a setting where you could do like a high quality recording and get 2 hours, or you
SP
could,
and LP.
right, exactly, right, or if you can make it, you can get 6 hours out of a videotape. So of course that's what I did, because hey, money don't grow on trees.
That's right.
So um and it wasn't even my money that I had to worry about. It was trying to get my parents to buy more blank tapes. So yeah, so you had to make the most of what you had. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
Octopussy, then something. It might have been Raiders actually, and then Flash Gordon.
Oh my God. You know what? I think we're in the same age range. I did
Oh yeah,
the same thing. I recorded A View to a Kill, and I recorded
yeah,
I think Never Say Never Again, which is weird because I thought
right,
at the time that Never Say Never Again was actually part of the official canon. It took me a couple of years later to
right,
write
right,
my
right.
first book. Said it's not. It's
Yep.
not. I was kind of disappointed, but hey, two Bond films in the same tape.
But yeah, but it's interesting though, because yeah, I think probably back then too, I don't really think I understood. Like I certainly didn't understand the bigger picture with lawsuits
Mhm.
and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All I knew was that there's another James Bond movie, but it was an unofficial, and I'm like, I have no idea what that means, because I mean, I don't know what makes an official James Bond movie at that point. So yeah, it was kind of a confusing time to kind of get into James Bond, actually.
You just enjoy what it was. It was a
Yeah,
big action adventure, espionage, beautiful
uh-huh.
women, gadgets, and whatever. And I
Absolutely.
think I told the story with you a couple of years ago. That was a funny story. I'm not tired of telling it. That my first experience in Bond, my dad took me to the theater in 1977 to see The Spy Who Loved Me. And that same summer, Star
Nice.
Wars, Star Wars was playing.
Right.
I don't want to see that guy in the tuxedo. I want to see Han Solo and Luke Skywalker.
Yep, yep, sure enough.
And sure enough, and like 2 years later, in a Friday night movie, I watched Thunderball. It's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
I have a big poster there
Yep, yep.
engraved. It's
Yeah,
Thunderball.
that's great. We definitely got into growing up at the time that we did. We definitely had it was a great time for movies. So how
Yeah.
could you not get caught up in it when you're that age, in that time?
So when you saw For Your Eyes Only, I know it's one of the most serious Roger Moore films in this era of doing Bond films.
Mm,
So, what elements of For Your Eyes Only capture your eye? What you say, oh my God, this is great, even though it was the most serious of the
yeah,
Roger Moore lighter Bond films.
yeah. It, yeah, it's interesting, and I still look back at it. When I think about For Your Eyes Only, and Octopus, I mean, to me, tonally, they're very similar films.
Mhm.
So that was kind of my impression then about. I knew that there were other James Bond films. So I assumed that all of them sort of had that same tone. And then, of course, you go back and you start seeing some of the other films, and you kind of go, oh, not really. Okay, yeah, I guess that they're different. Um, but For Your Eyes Only, in particular, that to me at that age, I kind of felt that film was just like a completely serious movie. It was a
Mm.
movie that completely took itself seriously. And and I can think of, like, I'm trying to think of good examples of like Cold War spy movies, and a lot of them, they're very dry. They're not fluffy fun movies. A lot of them are very serious,
Mhm.
cracking codes and passwords, and espionage, I'm thinking like Tom Clancy and that sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, I took For Your Eyes Only as being something that was right in that genre, yet somehow there seemed to be enough in it that I could really kind of get into it. Meaning there was a lot of good action. I mean, you watch that rock climbing scene,
Oh my God.
and your heart's kind of like up in your throat. You're like, wow. I mean, to this day, I still look at that and I go, wow. I mean, that was a really intense scene. And when the guy falls off, and gets caught, you just, again, your heart stops. So yeah, there was the underwater scenes when they're underwater and the guy comes out and in the big gear and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
he looks like a space monster, but this is kind of real, like this is really happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of this. It was almost like the meeting of worlds for me, because it was kind of the same excitement that I get from other films, from action films, even a little sci-fi in a way. But
Yeah.
I looked at it and said, "Wow, this is happening in a real life movie." So, I think in that way it kind of really grabbed me, and I kind of thought like, "Wow, are all adult films like this? Like, is this like what being a grown up is like?"
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was kind of like just the perfect pairing. It was where real life meets this kind of over the, adventure fantasy type films.
It's a perfect balance of the formula
Yeah.
of the James Bond film. And if you go to Joseph Channel, being James Bond, his last video, his top 25 Bond films, you can see the way he described the films. That
No.
not particularly the over-the-top bombastic classic ones are the one who draws uh, Joseph attention. They are the one who has story and the
Yeah.
elements of Bond.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I think it's interesting now because I feel like there's, like, for me to try to explain, what it is about certain films that really grab me.
Mhm.
And when I try to describe having one foot in a more realistic setting as opposed to everything just being over the top and crazy, I feel like today there's a lot better examples of that, frankly. And it's sort of easier to explain. Like if you watch like, I mean, the original Die Hard,
Yeah,
a flawless action film, right? If you saw the last one they put out, that was him and his son in Russia.
that was awful.
Oof, that was the first time I ever walked out of. I mean, I
You
it was
did? You walk out of the theater?
well, no, I mean, and I waited until the end, but boy, it was a slog getting through it. I mean, I walked out of the film and I just went, that sucked. That was terrible. I mean, it
Oh
was
my
it was
god.
awful. But the example that I kind of go to is like, I mean, in the first one, John McClane jumps off a roof, right? He ties himself up with the fire hose, goes over the edge,
The
and it's
explosion,
it's
the
the
helicopter.
big explosion, right? It is hair raising, and the part. I mean, when then just him swinging out, shooting the window, and going through. I remember before I even saw Die Hard, I'm pretty sure Bruce Willis was on David Letterman, and he
Okay.
was pitching Die Hard, and they just showed. They said, "Okay, now we're going to show you a clip from Die Hard," and it was that. And I remember
Oh,
just being
really?
like, "Oh yeah," and I was just sitting there like my eyes are just like wide open. I was like, I have to see this movie. Um, anyway, getting back to I can talk 2 hours about Die Hard, but
I don't
fast
mind.
forward,
Go ahead.
yeah, fast forward to this new one, and there's a semi similar scene where him and the son go running out the window. They just go running full steam out the window. The camera follows them out and down,
Yeah.
and they just sort of crash into scaffolding or whatever else happens to be there, whatever. And of course, it's so phony, it's so fake. I mean, it's obviously CGI. I mean, again, if you're filming this in real life, the camera's not going to go over with you. So like there's no sense of tension, there's no sense of realism, therefore there's no sense of excitement. It's just whatever. And that's kind of how I feel about, like, again, when you go back to a film like For Your Eyes Only and they're doing stunts for real, and again they have that one foot in a realistic world, it works better. It works better because you can get caught up, you get excited. It's almost like, when you see a great stunt and you're
Hmm.
not only worried for the stunt man, but you're worried for the camera guy too. It's that kind of excitement that we love. And when they get too silly, it doesn't have that anymore. So
All right.
so
I
again, that
understand that.
yeah, I mean, so that kind of narrative realism, again, I don't want it overly realistic so it gets boring, but
No,
just enough realism that it keeps you engaged.
you don't want the movie to insult your intelligence. What you say?
Yeah, that too, and that happens sometimes.
Don't have to. So, Joseph, when do you decided to do your book and be involved in the Bond community?
Um, that's a great question. I mean, I can tell
It's been a
you
while.
that. Oh yeah, I mean, we're going back. I can remember 2004 talking about how this was the thing I wanted to do. So we're going back a ways for sure. That was when I was really starting to. I'm trying to think like when the fanaticism really started to take hold. I mean, I can remember the gap between. I mean, I was a Bond fan, I, pretty much from Octopussy onward.
Me,
So
me too. Me too. Same time frame.
right, so View to a Kill, the Daltons. I mean, I'm seeing
Hmm.
these in the theater multiple times. So I'm a big fan. Then you have that gap. You have a couple years in between, which now looking back isn't even that much of a gap anymore.
Yeah.
But that kind of holding pattern between License to Kill and Goldeneye, and it was interesting because again, for me at that age, and again, we're probably the same ballpark.
Yeah.
The those were pretty important years, meaning like I was probably 19 when License to Kill came out. And by the time I'm seeing the trailers for Goldeneye, now I'm 24, 25. And that's kind of a substantial time. Like that's a pretty formative
That's
time in
right.
your life. Like now suddenly you feel I mean, now that looking back where we're kids, but you felt at the time like you're kind of a grown-up, like, oh wow, now there's a Bond movie coming
Yeah.
out. I'm an adult, I'm working full time, I'm starting to uh, be conscious of clothing, and I'm gonna have to dress nice for work, etc. Uh,
Different
but yeah, it
mentality.
was yeah, exactly. So it was kind of a big deal. So around Goldeneye, Tomorrow Never Dies, and definitely The World Is Not Enough. Like I'm genuinely getting to be like more than just a casual fan. I'm really starting to get into like just really eating it up and really becoming a hardcore fan. And I mean, the internet was starting to come out, and I'm seeing a bunch of good websites pop up. I'm seeing a lot of names and people. I'm starting to know some of the writers who are, do commentary and doing articles, and they're really great stuff. Uh, so I guess it's somewhere around then that I'm really starting to consider, like, hey, I really need to get more involved in this whole thing. So yeah, probably so between like 99, 2003, 4, that's when it's starting to percolate. I remember 2004 is probably when I started to put like pencil to paper and say, okay, I'm gonna
Okay.
do something, and I started to get that. Um, Probably early 2000s was when I really started to get that whole idea about like, what is it about James Bond? And it started to occur to me. I said, I think one of the things about James Bond, I mean, again, we all know lifestyle, we know girls and travel and stuff. And one of the things that jumped out at me really quickly was that I said, but the funny thing is the guy can do anything. Like
Absolutely.
like what, like Octopussy again, like it I always thought it was something that we sort of take for granted. Like, again, like if you watch Octopussy, there's a lot of elements that just really knock you out and really hit you over the head and just like, wow, this is incredible. But there's other parts that kind of get under the radar. For example, again, he goes and meets Kamal. He's playing backgammon. Well, lucky that Bond knows how to play backgammon. He knows how it's played. He knows, how to take this guy on and beat him at his own game. He walks into Sotheby's. You know, he's got a seat at the front table and he knows the game. He knows what an auction is. He knows how it works. He knows the etiquette, etc. So yeah, it was like I said, it was one of those things that you don't notice right away, but at second, third glance, or however many glances I was taking at that point, you start to go, this. I mean, that's sort of an unsung thing about Bond is that he just can do anything. So that was something that I really gravitated towards. And suddenly I was like, oh, that's going to be my thing, is talking about all of these things that he knows how to do. I mean, and the list, it was very easy to come up with a very long list of all of those things that he can do. Cause again,
Yeah.
it's practically everything. So, that was kind of my shtick, and that's sort of what I ran with. And I just was really enjoying the hell out of it.
And then when you publish it, what was the first reaction when the public actually bought the book and have read any reviews and said, "What this guy's doing writing a James Bond book about being James Bond?"
Well, I tell you, that was a wake up call, because it was funny, because sort of see a funny thing happened on the way to being an author. Again, my plan was always, oh, I'm going to write a book. And it was also around that time that all of a sudden I was discovering podcasts. Like literally,
Mhm.
I can remember it was right around that time, the first time I even heard the word podcast, and I had to go, what is that? And luckily I had a friend who was he was one of these guys who was always 10 steps ahead of me technology wise. So he was already doing a gaming podcast with this other crew. And
Oh, really?
so yeah, and he would send me clips and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. You got your own little radio show here. It's pretty wild. And in fact, he was the one who he offered me. This is when From Russia with Love came out, the video game.
Oh, I
And
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, so he basically offered me. He says, "Hey, do you want to do a segment?" He goes, "You record it and whatever." And I was like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." So yeah, and it was funny too, because I don't even think I even had the game yet at that point. And I'm seriously, all the only time I really got into gaming at all was only the James Bond games. It
Me
was
too. Me too.
and they're
Yeah.
fun as hell. I mean, I enjoy the hell out of them. But like it was hard for. And I think I had like one or two others that I bought around the same time. Just well, if I'm gonna get the console, I better get a couple. And there's a few that were pretty good, but it was really just the Bond games that I only played. But so he basically said to me, he says, "You want to do a segment?" I said, "Sure." And I recorded, edited, etc. This whole thing, kind of had like a rough script that I was following, etc. And I sent it over, and I was like, and all of a sudden, like that was it. I had the bug, and I was like, that's what I should do. I should do like all of this material that I'm working on for a book. That should be my
Mhm.
podcast, and that's basically what it was. And it was great because the window just sort of opened. And again, I'm also kind of pigeonholing myself a little bit back then. I'm thinking, well, every episode should be this, and it should be roughly this long. It should be well edited, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but thankfully, there were other things that came out. Like, for example, my first episode was literally 2 or 3 weeks before the release of Casino Royale. So
Okay.
it was sort of in this shadow. Like I didn't even know what was coming yet. All I knew is like they're working on another film. And again, there was no gaps. So like Die Another Day happened, a couple years before. So it was just a
4 years. So
typical
4 years
in
only.
between. Right. Yeah. It wasn't anything like gigantic necessarily. And plus this was also a great time because back in those days, in between the Brosnans, you usually got a book by Raymond Benson. You probably got another video game or two of James Bond. So there was always other stuff happening in between. So there wasn't like this
Filling
desert
the
where
void.
nothing was
Filling the
happening.
void.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so yeah, so kind of just normal James Bond time. So here I am, I put the first episode out. I think I did an intro episode. Then I did my first one, which is about poker. Um, Not really knowing that I knew poker was good. I knew they were going to do poker in Casino Royale, but I didn't, again, I haven't seen it yet. So I didn't really know how prominent it was going to be, etc. Um, but yeah, but once I saw that film, I said that even though my podcast was going to be about these subjects, there is no way I'm not going to do a review and a commentary on the film. So
Of
that
course.
kind of opened things up a little bit more too. And that was again, and sure enough, my buddy Scott, who I did the whole video series with. I mean,
Yeah, I remember.
this was me and him back then, just doing doing a review of Casino Royale and just kind of raving about it, going on about how great it was. So yeah, it was. I feel like I'm all over the place answering your question, but um, that was kind of, yeah, that was sort of the mentality back then, was wanting to sort of break into this larger world of James Bond, wanting to be a little more of a part of it, be part of the bigger conversation. So that was sort of what kicked it all off, really.
Yeah, so you did being James Bond 2004, pretty much doing the world of the, let's say, the first timeline, the first universe, from Connery to Brosnan.
Mm,
Once Casino Royale hit theaters 2 years later after your book is released, the book went out the window. The formula went out the window. The brand new Daniel Craig era began.
yeah.
So how you did like an updating on your book and the way you saw James Bond after Casino Royale?
Well, the book didn't come out. See, this was the thing. The again, what it started as a book, but then I kind of got into the whole podcasting thing, and I
Okay,
kind of just
okay.
went off in that direction. It wasn't until much later that I said, "Hey, I still want to do a book, even though I've kind of done all this podcast thing." Um, so I still again did the book, but the book was a little later. Um, but yeah, that the whole Craig world now. Put it this way. I started the podcast at the best possible time because
Yes, you were lucky.
honestly, and it was just kind of dumb luck, honestly, because I didn't
Yeah,
know. I mean, for all I knew, the Craig film was going to be miserable and just going to nail the coffin and put the nail in the coffin of James Bond forever. For all I knew, um, I mean, I wasn't really thinking that because I thought like, well, even if they stop making movies, we still have like 20, 20
20,
films
twenty-one
and how many
films.
years of et cetera. Yeah. So, but just out of dumb luck, I mean, the Casino Royale ended up being a huge hit, really pulled in a lot of new fans.
Indeed.
So I was kind of reaching an audience of people. And again, I'm one of the few Bond podcasts. I think at that point there were like two, um,
So you're a
genuinely like,
pioneer. You're a pioneer.
kind of. So like I said, timing was great. People who were into James Bond, who were discovering podcasts or just doing a search, and here I am. So they're loving it. So yeah, it was pretty cool. Incidentally, you did ask me before, like, what happens when you finally do publish the book, and even though it was a little later, what was funny was that I'm doing the podcast, right? I'm having a great time. People are loving it, and the topics are great. And honestly, I'm getting nothing but praise. This is great. Keep doing what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as you put out a book and you put a price tag on the same material, now suddenly it's a different lens that people are looking at it
Indeed.
through.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah, so that was um and again, it was mixed. Like people who kind of knew me, knew what I was doing, was familiar with what it was. They all loved it, and I got nice reviews from those people. Then there were other people who bought it. I think they were expecting something, along the lines of like Paul Curiosity, that
Hmm.
this is more about like, confidence like James Bond, talk to girls like James Bond, et cetera, et
Oh,
cetera.
really?
And it was nothing like that. And I think a lot of those people were just like, I mean, I remember there was one day, again, I'm working full time at a regular job at that point. I mean, I'm working my regular job, and some friends from work, who, casual acquaintances or whatever, they got wind that I had a book out, and they were like, "Wait, what?" So, and I remember going to lunch. Like I'm driving, we're just going to lunch down the road, and there's me, two other guys, and one guy in the back seat, and he pulls out his phone and he starts looking my book up on Amazon, and he starts reading all the bad reviews, and we're all hysterical. And he's in the back seat looking at his phone, going, the author misses the point, yada yada yada. I mean, we're all cracking up, but like he's only reading the bad ones. Um,
Yeah, why
so
not?
yeah, it was a different kind of world. Like again, like people who knew me and knew what the book was, they got it. But for other people who just bought this book, being James Bond, like I said, expecting something more of like an inspirational something or other, and they're getting like 8 chapters on specific things, not realizing this is part of a bigger world, whatever, etc.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a little hit and miss as far as the reviews go.
So, you know, we are older Bond fan, but we always know that the Bond community was always there from the
Yeah.
beginning of the franchise. But in recent years, the Bond community has been united through social media. So, what was your first connection after you doing your podcast and you releasing your book of the current Bond community as we all know and love?
Ah, boy, that's interesting. First off, it's when you start a podcast, and you can probably sympathize when,
Yes.
like, for me, especially back then, because I literally, the podcast was long before social media as we know it. In fact, I actually had a website and I had a bulletin board, like an old school forum. And that was really popular for a while. That was really, I had a lot of people who used to
Do
post
you
on
have a
there.
MySpace? Do you have a MySpace? Being
It
James Bond?
was I did have a MySpace page. Yes, that's how far back we're going. But I had
Yeah.
my own website, and the forum on the website was doing gangbusters.
All
Um,
right.
Once like Facebook came out, that kind of sort of everything sort of started to move over to Facebook, and I was like, "Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
whatever."
Mm-hmm.
So but back in those days, when you put out a podcast, you just felt like you were just putting a message in a bottle and throwing it in the ocean, and you had
See what
no
happens.
idea, right? Because there was no like it wasn't like when you put something on Instagram or Facebook where you instantly comment or get likes or whatever. There was
Feedback.
none of that. You just put it out there and you just sort of hoped that people were gonna hear it. Um, so initially it was quiet, a lot of crickets. Um, when it comes to the community that we know today, I probably Zaritsky may very well have been my first contact that I kind of still know in the community today. Because again, um, like the Bond community has sort of like it has peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People come in, people go away. Uh, but Zarisky was one of the earliest people that I remember reaching out to, because I remember this was again I was just podcasting for not very long, and he was writing articles, and back then he was doing articles for Remmert's site, the James Bond lifestyle site. Uh,
Yes.
so he was doing articles for him, and I remember one of his first ones was like the frugal Casino Royale, or Casino Royale on a budget. And I
That's
remember,
right.
and of course, like it's right up my alley. So I
Me
read
too.
it, and I'm like, oh, dude, this was spectacular. I loved it.
Yeah.
So and after a couple emails back and forth, we ended up meeting up. I went over to his house. Like he had a little Bond gathering, and he says, "Hey, come on over." It was, and I went, and we've kind of been fast friends ever since. Um, so that was probably, and that would have been honestly not long after. It was somewhere between the release of Casino Royale and Quantum. So it had to be right around like 2007. So I'm just getting my feet wet in the whole podcast. I'm probably podcasting for less than a year at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was, I mean, and I think through him I met a few people. Not long after that, we went to I went to a symposium at Hofstra at Hofstra University,
Yeah.
and I met a lot of people there too. So, and again, still kind of a budding podcaster at that point. Um, and again, it was funny because podcasting, like I think like today, when you say podcast, pretty much everyone knows what you're talking about. Like, and there's a certain level of gravitas to it, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Um, but I think a lot of maybe I shouldn't say it that way, because I think podcasting is one of those things still anybody can do it. So, but anyway, but most people know what a podcast is. Back then, I was still explaining. Well, it's like this little radio show on the internet. They're like, what?
Doing a
So
disclaimer, an explanation before.
yeah, right. But anyway, but I did meet a lot of people then too. That kind of blew my world up even more. So yeah, I mean, it was that was those were the days when I was starting to see, um, you know, faces and stuff. I mean, again, like Zaritsky was actually a presenter at that symposium.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah,
How about
so
old
he,
David?
yeah, I mean, it was basically like like because he was like getting to be well known as a Bond collector. Um,
It
so,
still is. It still is.
of course, absolutely. Um, so yeah, so that was probably when my world really did start to. In fact, I'll tell you a story. Um, Raymond Benson, who obviously write the continuation novels.
That's right.
And back then, I think he was the only one. Like there was, I mean, since then he's kind of retired that job, and there's been a lot of other authors since. But
Hmm.
back then, he was still the guy who was writing the Bond books. So, and I actually met him at that symposium. And not only did I meet him, but I think at one point, David and I were sitting down, and one of our other friends was with us. And I think we was like in the middle of the day, we were getting lunch, whatever. And a couple people were walking past, and they stopped, and they were talking to us. And I look, and I'm like, hey, wait a second. That's Raymond Benson standing right there. And I kind of like, my mind kind of was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Uh, so he was there, and he was a presenter, and it was pretty wild. And it was a 2-day thing. And at the end of the second night, or at the end of the second day, there was a dinner, like a full blown dinner.
Hmm.
Raymond Benson is there, and I didn't know this at the time, but he's an incredible musician.
I
And
didn't know
he
that.
was, yeah, oh yeah, he was playing the piano, and he played like an entire suite of a bunch of the Bond themes, and it was really, really good. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty wild. So,
Nice.
and by the way, Robert Davi was the speaker that night.
You don't
He was,
say. Oh
oh
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
God.
That was pretty wild. So that was a lot of fun. But the capper was at the end of when everything was dying down, and I'm talking to people, we're having a good time, and couple people said, hey, we're going back to the hotel. You want to go back and
Hmm.
get drinks? Absolutely. And a lot of people were sort of milling around saying, how are we going to get back to the hotel? And Raymond Benson happened to be one of them. And I chimed in. I says, hey, I have my car. I could drive a few people back. So I drove a few people back to the hotel, Raymond Benson being one of them. And so again, my head is just like, I'm gonna drive Raymond Benson in my car. I'm totally geeking out, right?
Yeah.
And then I get to my car, and I realize it's full of junk. I was like, oh no, this is so embarrassing,
Don't
right?
you hate when that happens?
It was so bad. It was in fact, it was my brother and I. My brother and I were both the movie guys growing up. So we had a laserdisc player, and we had like 3 boxes of laserdiscs that we had to get rid of, or we're going to sell. We're going to get rid of it finally. And I had all of them in the back of my car, 3 big boxes of these things. So I can wedge 2 of them into the trunk of the car. I still
Yeah.
had a third. And Raymond's like, I can put it on my lap if you want. And I was like, okay. So, but again, I'm embarrassed, whatever. So
Yes.
here I'm driving everybody to the hotel, and I'm looking at Raymond Benson in my rearview mirror with my box on his lap, like he's sitting there like this, and I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, I mean, so that was a pretty wild thing. So it's I mean, especially at that point, just blew my mind.
You want to hear a funny story? I think I never
Yeah.
told you this. Remember back in 2016 at the New York Film Festival when Daniel Craig was do the speaker,
Okay. Yep. Yep.
and you guys were there. You guys were there, you and David and others.
Okay.
I remember I took a cab from Times Square to go there,
Hmm.
and I went there, and I remember there's David Saritsky, the Bond Experience, and I saw you guys there. Where's the line? They said all the way back, all the way back. You go because I remember
Oh, that's great.
after that you were going to a place to eat. I think David told that in his podcast. Well,
Mm,
the first time we met was very briefly in that line
that's great.
in that New York Film Festival. And I
Yeah.
did ask a question. I know you asked a question. I think David did.
I did. Yes, he did. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. That's funny too, because I remember that was an interesting night for me, because I remember at that point, I'm trying to remember what year this would have been. It was after, I guess, I mean, it was between Skyfall and actually no, it had to be after Spectre. It was after Spectre, but
Hmm.
even that was going back years at this point. I think I remember that night in particular probably inspired me the most to start doing videos along with the podcast, because I had been podcasting again since 2006, and everyone is walking up to Dave Zaritsky going, "Hey, aren't you Dave Zaritsky?" And I'm getting a little butthurt because like nobody knows who I am, and I'm like, "Son of a
Yeah.
bitch." It wasn't until, I mean, at least 3 or 4 or 5 people came up to him, and so it was finally after the actual event, and I went up and I asked a question, and I specifically remember, saying thank you for all the contributions you gave to James Bond, and what was something that he gave to you, and um, etc. Finally, afterwards, somebody walks up to me, and goes, "Hey, are you being James Bond?" And I'm going, "Yes, I am." Like finally, I was like, now I'm all puffed up, and I'm like, finally,
Yeah.
somebody knew who I was. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great.
Oh,
Yeah. But honestly, I think that was like, I said, I got to start making videos too.
yeah. I did. When that night, going back to the New York Film Festival,
Mm.
I asked some usher, "Can you film this? I'm going to ask Daniel Craig a question." and the usher took me from below my waist, and at that time was a little heavier, and all my belly was sticking out. I was asking this well-fit man.
I
The
sympathize,
last,
brother.
yeah, it's like, oh my god, of all the places and the angles you can take me. You have
Oh
to take
man.
me in my worst position,
Yep.
and I
Yep.
haven't. And I think I did post it one time my personal page, and I
Mm.
tried to edit it, but I still embarrassed of that because I did ask a question, and I
Yeah.
asked Dana Craig, because you and Madeline went out to this is the end of the Bond films, and I forgot what at the end of the film said James Bond will return, and he told me, that eventually will return.
There you go.
And you are a fan, and you are excited to talk to an actual and the current James Bond actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joseph, one thing and is for sure about us Bond fanatics, because we are way beyond normal people here. We're
Yep.
fanatics.
Yep.
We have a certain degree of patience. Patience, they say patience is a virtue. And remember, after that New York Film Festival, we thought for sure, that the next Bond film will be arriving in what, 1 year and a half or something.
Mm.
We never knew. We never knew that we have to wait 6 years. And of course, we have the pandemic and the delays and the involves going out. How hard was for you? I don't think it was very hard because you have a lot of content. It was good or bad, the delays, because
Mm.
you, my friend, you in particular, you did a creative way of doing your own thing between the delays and the release of No Time to Die. Tell us, how was that process of waiting for No Time to
Mm.
Die?
Yeah. I think initially it was tough. Then it got to be not so tough. Then I got to be tough again. Yeah, it was a weird time, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was kind, and it. I remember for the longest time. I mean, it's funny too. Think about how long or not that long ago it was that he was on Colbert, and they asked him, "Will you play James Bond again?" And he said yes. Um, I mean, just think how long it took us to even know if they were going to make another one.
Yeah.
Like we had no idea what was going on. Nobody seems very energetic to get the ball rolling again. It's everybody's kind of tired, etc. Um, so it was for a while. It was kind of just limbo, and then you had that sort of. And I remember kind of during that time, doing content, having fun, doing videos, and etc. Um, but then you found out, okay, they're doing it. They're gonna do another film. Craig is gonna do another one, etc., etc. So now we're just salivating. We're chomping at the
Yes,
bit,
we did.
waiting for news, waiting to hear what it's gonna be, etc., etc. So there was that phase, and it just seemed like it just took forever. And then you just got to that point where it was just like
A
brutal.
nightmare. A
Yeah,
nightmare.
exactly right. Everything just became, I mean, it took forever. And then all of a sudden you got the C word. All of a sudden now you got a pandemic,
Oh my
and
God.
all of a sudden now it's postponed. Now it's postponed again. Now we're going to do it. Then suddenly it was like, okay, we're really, really going to do it on this day. And then suddenly, no. I mean, that was tough. That was really, and it was, and the tough part, honestly, because at first it was tough because you just really wanted to see the film. Then it became tough because you were trying hard not to let that fatigue set in and just make you say, you know what, I don't even care if I ever see it. Like, I mean, that's what it
You got to that
became,
point. I know you got to that
right?
point.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it was really like I'm now just trying to put on a brave face because I don't want to start saying like, guys, I'm done. I don't care. Just tell me when it's on video. I'm out. It got that bad where you
Yeah.
just felt like like you felt like a fool every time they would tell you, oh, it's gonna come out. Yeah, is it? Like, I mean, you just like honestly, it was like a girl gave you her like kept giving you fake numbers and you kept calling it, like
Yeah.
it's
Studio
like,
out.
dude,
Studio out. They want to
after a while, it's
studio.
like, dude, take the hint.
Take the hint. It's like was infuriated me that there was a James Bond film
Right.
made in the can,
Yes.
ready for us to see, and we have to wait.
Right.
That was so awful.
Yeah.
So, oh
Like
my
it's
God.
it's just sitting there. I mean, if they tried, I can't think of if their goal was to torture us, I can't even imagine a better scenario. I mean, like, again, it took them how many years to make it, and then when it
Yeah.
was finally made, then it's like, yeah, no, you can't see it. It's done, and I remember even because at this point now I've got friends who are a little more in the know, and a lot of them have seen clips, and they're telling me, they're like, dude, the cinematography is what I keep hearing about, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to see this movie. And yeah, oh boy, it was brutal. It was hard. It was
Waiting 2 weeks between the UK and the US
right.
premiere.
Then you had that on top of it. Oh boy, and then of course for me personally, then at some point I'm like, oh, we're going to the premiere. We're going to the premiere
You're
in three
pinching yourself.
three different cities. Oh my god, forget it. I mean, I bought plane tickets. I got hotel reservations. I mean, like, it's just, this is going to be like a dream come true, and then eh, it just doesn't happen. And you're like,
My friend, I
oh,
was in the same boat with you.
oh,
I did have tickets to go to London with my
mm,
wife.
yeah,
We were going to see the premiere, and the C word, the C pandemic happened,
yeah, yeah,
and it's unfortunate, but hey, we did get to see it
yeah.
at home, not in London, but at home,
Right,
and
right.
I'm glad. I'm glad because we are in two different camps when it comes to No Time to Die. I'm glad. I'm glad for you that you did enjoy it, No Time to Die, and I'm glad you did. And you are in that camp of people who enjoy it. I don't want to say. Tell me, why did you enjoy No Time to Die, even though they killed the main player, the
Yeah.
main character?
Well, I guess for me specifically, I felt like I'm not reviewing the entire film. I'm
No,
just
no, no. You're not.
we're,
No.
we're just talking
You're
about
right
the
there. You're
ending
right
and
there.
why. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, it didn't bother me at all, mainly because I felt that it seemed to be straight out of Fleming, meaning,
Okay.
my if I had to paint a mental picture of James Bond and who my James Bond is, he's kind of half the cinematic James Bond and half the Fleming James Bond from all the original Fleming novels.
Hmm.
And when you read the novels, they don't all have happy endings. I mean,
No, they don't.
like James Bond doesn't always get the girl. Um, Sometimes the girl actually dies, like in the case of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, and by the way, Fleming tinkered with the idea of killing off James Bond. You know, if you read From Russia with Love, that
Hmm.
ends with him getting poisoned, because Fleming was tinkering with the idea of just ending the series, and to him that's a good as a way as any, because again, I don't think Fleming saw Bond as uh somebody who gets happy. I mean, again, cinematic James Bond will always go off into the sunset with the girl, and there's no two ways about that. um
Yeah.
but I've always thought that Craig's take on Bond, and it's partially Craig, partially the filmmakers behind the camera. You know, I've always seen this whole Craig series as being much more Fleming-esque than what
Oh
came
yeah.
prior.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so again, so and for better or for worse. So when this film concluded the way it did, first off, I remember feeling like I think a lot of people, when they saw that, they were really kind of blown out of the water. I was a little more prepared for the yeah. I was a little more prepared for the possibility that that could be a thing that could happen. So I'm really watching this, and again, this is probably not a good defense, but I'm watching this sort of through a critical lens, just thinking like, okay, there's a lot of ways they could wrap this up. What's going to be the way that this happens? And once you saw the daughter,
Hmm.
you kind of said that's probably how this is going to go. Because again, we've seen that trope once too many times. I mean, Iron Man, Logan.
Hmm.
You know, if a daughter shows up, you just watch out because you're basically done.
You're done.
Um, so again, I wasn't really that shocked, and frankly, I think the only thing I was wondering it was if they were going to do one of those little endings where, you know, all looks like it's lost, but at the last second there's a glimmer of hope that maybe, you know, that he's still alive. But I think if they
Like the
did,
Dark Knight Returns.
exactly, yes,
Yeah.
like that one. Uh, and I think if they had done that, I probably would have been disappointed, because then I would have just saw this as being a cinematic gimmick. Like they didn't see it through.
Hmm.
So I kind of thought, like, if you're going to do it, have the balls to actually do it.
They
Um,
did. They did it.
yeah. So again, and again, the other part of me that doesn't mind it's to me, I've always seen the Craig thing as a little bit of an experiment onto its own. So the fact that this one ends in that way doesn't really change anything for the next one. Meaning, like, let's say that once this film was done, in 3 years we would have another James Bond film with another actor, and we're basically, we have to start from scratch because you couldn't
Hmm.
do this story arc
No.
and then just swap. Even if he does go off into the sunset, there's no way you could just swap out the actors like they used to and
Yeah.
just keep on going like nothing had happened. So no matter what, the next film is going to be a new incarnation of James Bond. So how this one ends doesn't really affect that to me. Doesn't affect it at all, I don't think. So that's why I just felt like if you want to end this one like that, that's okay, because the next time out we'll start, and maybe, you know, because of how dour this ending was, maybe that'll inspire them to do things a little more up, a little more fun, a little more whatever.
So saying just saying that, and everybody was down after No Time to Die. I have listened to a lot of friends of mine who are not hardcore James Bond fanatics, and they know that the James Bond series, that the film series will continue. And that said to me this thing that I have tried to avoid, that, oh, this proves one thing, that the James Bond is a code name because the next guy has to be put the name James Bond. And they have
Right,
that
right.
notion that the next film, I don't know if they're going to explain it, that, well, they don't have to explain it, but I don't know what they're going to do to explain to the audience this is a brand new, because we know.
Mm.
But there's an impression of some people, I don't know if it's a general public perception, that killing James Bond in No Time to Die and bringing James Bond back in Bond 26 signify maybe that a code name theory, that dreaded
Mm.
code name theory, is kind of true? Can you explain that to the people who are my friends who are not in the know? How
Yeah.
can we explain that to them?
I would almost say just exactly the opposite, that I kind of feel like, if anything, this because when it starts up again, you're
Hmm.
gonna get introduced to Moneypenny, you're gonna get introduced to M, you're gonna get
Yeah,
introduced to Q and Felix Leiter. All of these people are gonna be different. So clearly it's going to be a complete reboot. So if I mean, put it this way, the only way that that code name thing would be true is if the new film starts, Ray Fiennes is there,
that's right.
Naomi Harris is there. I
Hmm.
mean, if that were the case and just a new guy walks in the door, well, then I guess so. But you and I both know that that's
No.
absolutely not going to happen. They're going to, in fact, I'm almost at the point now where I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if they did like period films like back in the 50s and 60s?" And even if that wasn't on the big screen, if we had our
Hmm.
big screen James Bond, but they were also doing the books again over on a small screen. Now, like I like 10 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, that would be cool if they actually did that," but I never thought they would. Now,
Hmm.
I not only do I think that they could, I'm almost 50-50 that that's what they'll do, because these days I kind of feel like everything I'm watching tends to be period films. The
That's
films that
right.
are they could be set in the 80s, they could be set in the turn of the century, they could be, you know, you know, like the game of the Crown of Thorns. What is it now? The Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. I mean, this is hugely popular. So period stuff is starting to get wickedly popular. I almost feel like, because of things like cell phones and technology and social media, it's getting very difficult to write films in the present day, to write stories that happen in the present day, because there's so many scenarios like mysteries and things like that, where today you would just Google something. You would Google it. You would pick up your
Hmm.
phone and start, just why can't let's just do a trace on the phone, see where they are. Um, you have to sort of go back in time, pre technology, to be able to write stories where people don't have those shortcuts. So yeah, I kind of wouldn't even be surprised if they actually do period films at this point.
So you think what the Bond films, the Eon should do is take the Star Trek J.J. Abrams route in 2009. Remember, they did the 2002 Picard series and New Generation, and then came back to Kirk, to the original
Yes.
series.
Yeah. Yeah.
It did work. It did work.
Oh, it did. In fact, I remember when that film came out, I was really impressed with what they did and how they did it, because I thought like, how else can you go back and revisit the original series and write
Hmm.
original stories? So you have to do this
Yes.
kind of skewed timeline, and that makes perfect sense. And I thought, and you're not stepping on the toes of the original series either, because you're saying that this is a different timeline. So I thought, all right, that's pretty clever. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways, yeah, this is kind of similar if they do that. See, it's funny because when the Craig films started and they did Casino Royale, I remember thinking even back then, how are they going to proceed now that they've gone back and done the original book and basically said this is, a brand new timeline. I mean, that's what this always was. So
The ultimate reboot.
it was the one single, it was the first time. And again, you know, I remember being kind of skeptical, because I thought, you know, because reboots and stuff is kind of the thing now in films, where we'll just
Hmm.
reboot and start over. Now James Bond is going to jump on that bandwagon. We never needed to do that before. I kind of,
We did soft reboots, but not.
Right.
when
Yeah. I mean, I've always felt that the Brosnan timeline was sort of a soft it was just an unspoken reboot, really, because I
that's
mean there
right.
was never any direct reference to Tracy necessarily. It just, I mean, it all
Very
felt
vague, very
very
vague,
different.
very
Very
vague.
right, extremely vague. um so yeah, I so that's why, yeah, that's why I say I've always felt that the Craig timeline thing didn't throw me too much, because I kind of felt like it was, at this point, it was just kind of unspoken that we keep doing reboots. I mean, late, like, yeah, you'd have to go as far back as Lazenby to really try to hit the point home that this is the same guy.
Hmm.
Like, I get it, but after that, it just started to be like, look, guys, this character's been around since 1962 on the big screen, at least. So how are we going to keep pretending that this guy is a World War II veteran? It doesn't make any sense. I
That
mean, so
doesn't.
we just,
Yeah.
we've already kind of just gone with that idea. Um, so yeah, you know, I mean, the future of Bond to me is as wide open as it's always been, frankly. Again, now that we've put Craig to bed, put him
Finally.
out to pasture.
No.
Are you are you how would you call yourself a fan of the Craig era, or not so much?
I was a fan at first. I didn't like the way they didn't plan out, because when
Yeah,
they got to Quantum of Solace, I did like the quantum organization. I did like what they could do with the quantum organization. Once
mm,
they got the rights to Spectre, they're starting to integrate it, and they don't know what to do.
yeah,
They have no plan. They have no plan. They just went out just like the latest Star Wars trilogy did, with no plan, no
yeah,
plan, and
yep,
and that put me off a bit.
yeah,
But I always was a big fan of Craig. Casino Royale, Skyfall, the best of the Daniel Craig era. But
yeah,
once Spectre and No Time to Die, and they killed the character, for me that was an insult. For
mm,
me that was an insult, and I like the film in a few ways, but for me, even though you said that the real Fleming, the novels that not have a happy ending, but
yeah,
I was brought up just like you in the cinematic James Bond. I was brought up in the Cobby era. And
yeah,
the Cobby era, you went out to the theater feeling good because James
yeah,
Bond saved the day.
yeah,
And I think I still have that little kid in me
yeah,
when was watching James Bond in the 80s. But
yeah,
I think over time, this film, and I know you are ahead of the curve right here, that this film, No Time to Die, will have the same acclaim and respect that All Her Mighty Secret Service have right now. I
yeah.
think that.
I wouldn't say the same.
No, no, no,
Again,
no, no. But
there's, yeah, right. I mean, there's no part of me that will ever claim that this is as good as On Her Majesty's. I mean, that's not my argument. But I but I
it's in
do
your
think
top
that
10. It's in your top 10.
it's in my top 10. It's not on par
No,
with,
no.
any of the classic Fleming novels, which is what
Mhm.
On Her Majesty's is. And again, On Her Majesty's is just, the whole story works for me. Um, but no,
Yes.
but I do think that people will kind of, um, you know, I noticed that sometimes, like, when Pierce came along, people were saying, "Well, thank God we're done with that Timothy Dalton guy." And then once Craig came in, suddenly everybody was going like, "Who the hell was Brosnan? Craig is so much cooler. Brosnan's not cool at all." And now that people have like Craig fatigue, they're kind of rediscovering Pierce Brosnan again, and which is,
It's a
again,
cycle.
which
It's
is
a
fine,
cycle.
right? But it's a cycle. So I do think that once the smoke settles on Craig a little bit, and people are,
Mhm.
again, that fatigue, and I can understand the fatigue. Trust me, and I get
15
it. I have a
years.
little,
15
right,
years.
exactly. Like don't pat yourself on the back for being the longest running James Bond when you've only done 4 movies. I mean, calm down.
Five.
Well, I mean, I think at the time when he became the longest running, it was still 4 at that point.
Four. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's like, dude, all right, calm down.
Moore. Royer Moore still is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just running and hiding someplace and not making any movies and calling yourself the longest running. Yeah, no, no, no. I
No,
mean,
no.
Roger Moore put out movies. I mean, that guy was a workhorse, and that I mean,
It
having
was
7 films. I mean, that's
in
when you're
in
impressed.
12 years.
Bingo, exactly. Um, so yeah. But yeah, I do think that people will look back on the Craig era and say that was and again, even like Craig's films were kind of had ups and downs. I mean, it's not a stellar, exactly. It's not a stellar, flawless period by any stretch either. In fact, honestly, we were talking about you said your point about them not planning. I completely agree with, and it's the irony of Spectre for me is that they're trying to say, look, we had it all planned all along. He was behind every single, and
Yes.
it just drove the point home that they didn't plan it. I mean, it
No,
was,
no, no. That this is sad because you
yeah,
got good writers, you got a great team in Barbara and Michael,
yes,
and they do research, and you thought for sure, at
yeah,
least if you're gonna do an arc of Craig, you have something planned out,
yes,
and that
right.
shocked me. They didn't.
Yeah,
They just
exactly. I
play
mean,
by ear.
even, I mean, I am as big a fan of Casino Royale as you will find. I am a gigantic fan of the character of Vesper. I thought they hit a home run with that. But even when they're still talking about Vesper 5 films later, I'm like, guys, enough with that already. Stop, just stop.
Turn the page.
15 years later, and he's still. I mean, the whole point of James Bond at the end of Casino Royale, he says the bitch is dead. The whole point was that he was a cold-hearted son of a bitch who can put somebody out of his mind and walk away and not look back. And we've spent 15 years looking back. Stop already.
Yeah, stop because
Uh-huh.
if you want to make a James Bond that it is the James Bond we love, he
Yeah.
doesn't care about emotional attachments.
Yes. Yeah.
He doesn't care about emotional
Right.
attachment.
And again, I don't mind, even in the books there are moments of melancholy where he is looking back a bit, but not obsess. I mean, but this was just obsessively, like, I mean, honestly, it was like there's the Fleming novels, even though there were moments where he looks back, it's not, I mean, it's like a subplot of all 5 films that Vesper is still lingering, and it's like, guys,
Yeah.
yeah, no.
Do you think that in the Daniel Craig era that they delved a lot of emotion stuff and looking for Vesper and his parents and you think that the Mission Impossible films filled the void that we were looking for in the Bond films when Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout came out last decade?
I I can't argue with that. I kind of feel like, I don't know if they filled the void as if we were looking for them, but when they came along, boy, did they grab our attention, didn't they? And they are holding on tight. One of the things about Bond is that, going back to, remember True Lies with Schwarzenegger,
Yeah,
I kind of feel like,
94.
yeah, even back then there was kind of, I feel like the sharks were circling a little bit, where people were starting to notice that the Bond films are getting a little, I don't want to say lazy, but just kind of stagnating a little bit and not being what they could be. So every so often you would have somebody sort of come out with their own spy movie and really kind of, you know, wake the Bond franchise up and go, oh boy, they're making us look bad. True Lies was one, Born Identity was another one that, that really kind of woke up and said, oh, but this is what spy movies could be if you guys want to get a little more serious. But yeah, the Mission Impossible franchise, that, I mean, and how many franchises can you think of that got consistently better and better
Very
as
few.
opposed to the other way around?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I can think of a single franchise that has done that the way Mission Impossible has. I mean, I thought the first Mission Impossible was pretty good.
But
I
decent.
Decent. I mean, it
Yeah.
was yeah. The second one, I have a soft spot for the second one. Not a lot of
You
people
do?
like it. Oh, I like it a lot. I think it's,
Really?
in fact, I would even say that one, I'm not. I wouldn't say that it's like one of the greatest films of all time, but I think the
No, it's not.
story is kind of oddly really tight. Like it's a really well put together story. There's not. I can't find plot holes in it.
Was
I think
different
it
from the first one.
works.
Totally
Very
different.
different, right? I mean, and I'm a sucker for that. Like really
Me
good
too.
style, really nice cinematography. The music is kind of spot on for me. A good, nice little romance happening. I like it. I like it a lot. But then 3 came along, and all of a sudden now that's raising the stakes again. And then 4 and 5, I mean, then it just kept getting better. It was like, I mean,
Did you hire Ralph McQuire
I
to
tell you,
direct a
I mean,
Bond film?
seriously, I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like I don't, I tell you what, people always ask me like, who would you get to direct the next Bond film? And I'm always a little short on, and they always ask me who you want the next Bond
Nolan,
to
Nolan,
be.
Nolan, Nolan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, Nolan comes up a lot. Um, but I always I say to people, I said I hate to say it, but I really I'm not up that much lately on
Hmm.
like new filmmakers, all the new actors and all the new series. Like I'm not really consuming that much stuff. Um, but yeah, I think McQuarrie would have to be the guy. I feel like he would. I mean, this guy really, he just knows how to put out a phenomenally exciting, satisfying film. He knows what an
Yeah.
action hero should be. I mean,
He worked
he's
on the Top
just
Gun Maverick movie too.
right. I
My
mean, and wasn't
God.
that was one of the best films you've seen in a long time too? I mean, boy, they just know how to do it. So I would love. If they said he was going to do the next one, I'd be tickled,
Oh, he knows.
pretty tickled.
He. You know for sure that Christopher McGuire. Sorry, that's not Ralph McGuire. Ralph McGuire was the designer for the Star
Yep,
Wars.
that's why that
For
name always stuck out with me. Yeah,
yeah, Ralph McGuire, but Christopher McGuire. He knows Bond, and you know for sure. Hey, let's be honest. The Mission Impossible films tried to copy some element and some action scenes from the Bond
yeah,
films.
yeah.
Yeah,
It,
and
it
they're not
does make
ashamed to
you.
do it.
Yeah, it does kind of make you wonder if he's not purposely saying, "Hey guys, look what I did. And I did a little bit better, even, huh?"
Yeah, and the next one you see the GoldenEye motorcycle jump, and you can see the For Your Eyes Only yellow
Yep,
car
yep.
doing. They're doing Bond, and it's incredible that they're doing a rip off of Bond, but it's sometimes even better movie than the current Bond, and that's why it
Seriously.
pisses me off. Man, how can Bond to be a
Right.
you know?
I mean, honestly, I remember when Fallout. I mean, the last seriously, I guess it's 6 films now, right? Because they did
Yeah,
it
six
was
films.
um Rogue
Rogue Nation,
Rogue Nation, and then what was the other one?
Fallout,
Fallout was the 6th one, but it was Rogue Nation and another one.
Ghost Protocol.
Ghost Protocol. That's it. Yep, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I mean, and just consistently got better. By the time Fallout came out, like I was just I opening night sitting there, I cannot wait for this film to come out, and it delivered. I mean, they're all just great. I mean, yeah, I kind and interestingly too, I feel like they are classic James Bond films without looking like they're ripping off James Bond. Meaning like
Hmm.
it's kind of it's still its own thing, you
It
know.
is,
But
yes,
boy,
yes.
are they tapping into some of the things that we love. I mean, just the locations are great. I mean, they're doing films where they're set in London, in Paris, you know, where you can see the city and you're just like, this is great. You know, I mean, it's everything that we like. So and they'll even throw in a tuxedo scene once in a while. I mean, it's you just can't beat it.
Yeah, and for the next incarnation of Bond, and you said that we can go to do a period film, but we can, hey, we can take those hard hitting action scenes from the Mission Impossible films
Mm,
and put it in the period easily. We can do
sure.
it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that like when I imagine like a period film, I mean, the beauty is that you can still do it and still do it with great cinematography, great
Hmm.
location hunting, like one of the films that really kind of I think got my brain moving a little bit was Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, that was a great film.
Right? I mean, that's a great
Yes.
movie. It's set in that time frame. I mean, to the point where the guy literally goes and buys a suit because and gets himself an Aston Martin. because
and
of
they play the Bond
Goldfinger.
film, and they play the Bond thing too.
Exactly. I mean, he goes to see Goldfinger and he goes and buys himself the suit. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was probably right around the time when it was starting to hit me. I said, I think they could do a really nice looking period film and make it, again, shot in a contemporary style, but set in that period. And again, these days you can have sets and all of the clothing and the cars, everything in the background, like very convincingly set in a different time period, and I
Joseph.
think it would work.
Yeah, they did it in 2015. Man from Uncle.
Ah, this is true.
Yeah, it did
Yeah,
it. And
that is
Henry
true.
Cavill
Yeah,
played Napoleon Solo, and it was
yeah,
his audition to do
yeah,
Bond.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm still think that he should do Bond, but I don't know. He's too famous
I I
right now.
I kind of well, but again, Roger Moore was famous. Pierce Brosnan was famous. I mean, honestly, see, I think that he would sort of really fall back into that like there was a pattern. I remember when Lazenby came out, they were specifically looking for an unknown,
Hmm.
which to me, like if somebody had asked me, I would have said that's the way to go. Um, things happen with Lazenby, so to be on the safe side, they went with Roger Moore, who was the Saint. He was a little
Hmm.
more recognizable, and that was kind of the safe bet at the time. Dalton was a little less known, but they wanted Pierce, who again he's known from TV. He's Remington Steele, so
Dalton was the backup, but came out
right,
nice.
yeah, yeah. But I think they like so I there's like two schools of thought when it comes to casting. Do you find the guy who's the diamond in the rough and relatively unknown, or do you do the safe bet and go with this person who's made a name for themselves, etc. So I think
Hmm.
if they do go with Cavill, um, I think that you're kind of getting back to that Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan school of thought where it says let's
That's
get a
right.
guy he's known, he's a known quantity. And again, I think if they go with Cavill, I think because again, Cavill to me is like I'm gonna see if I see if you're a big comic book nerd too. Um,
I am. Go ahead.
do you remember the Secret Wars?
Yes, the Avengers.
I had somebody tell me not that long ago. They said, who Cavill would be great as the Beyonder, and I was like, oh
Oh.
yeah. I said, I mean, yeah, I mean, because he's like just ridiculously good looking, and that was sort of the
Hmm.
idea when the Beyonder took a human form. He was
Yes.
like again, they made him to be like a ridiculously good looking guy, and like, oh yeah, that works perfectly, frankly.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so yeah, so Cavill, I mean, he's kind of just bizarrely a good looking guy. Like if you chiseled a guy out of stone, you're not going to come up with a better looking guy than this. That's why I feel like, Craig, I liked him because he was not particularly good looking. He was
It was rough.
he was rough. I mean, the girls would like him because he was chiseled and stuff, but, because
Yeah.
he obviously worked out. But he wasn't like he didn't have a handsome face per se.
Hmm.
Cavill does. So that's why I feel like if they go with Cavill, they can make films that are a little more fun. Again, when the girls are falling all over themselves for him, it makes sense. That kind of thing. Like I kind of feel like if they go with him, I'm not looking for like, really realistic, hardcore espionage spy films. Um, that would be like a return to just having fun, a little more fun, etc. So
Yeah. So we're in the waiting period now, Joseph. We are waiting and we don't know what's coming. So we have to be patient again.
yeah,
So what do you think as a bond community to, I'm trying to do my thing here. But guys like Calvin and David, I don't know how those guys do it, try to put content in wait
yep,
between now and the next month. It's my heart is up to them. It's incredible that
yes,
those guys do.
yeah.
What do you think that the Bond community who try to do content and try to keep this franchise alive should do in the next couple of years? Tell me your thoughts.
My thought is I am probably the last guy to ask that question because that is the very question that's been burning in my brain for quite
Yeah.
a while now. Um, And I wholeheartedly agree with you that David and Calvin have really just set the bar um, really high. I mean, these
Very high.
guys, the fact that they have been spitting out content without fail, like I don't think either of them have hit even the slightest speed bump with
No,
Bond 25 being
no,
in the rear view.
no.
They have just been gangbusters, and God bless them. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot of, and I'm not even really good on like Bond news. Like they will, like something will happen in the world of Bond. I don't even know what to make of it. Is this important? Is it not important? Um,
Hmm.
Calvin will he will take any opportunity to do a video, and it never. I mean, what stuns me is that it's all really good content. Like it's not just like finding an excuse to fluff up
Yeah,
15 minutes of talking. No,
yeah.
it's good quality insight. And I mean, Calvin has never been without genuinely good, insightful stuff. I mean, that was
Yes,
I remember
yes.
his early days. I mean, I've been listening and watching Calvin's videos pretty much since he started.
Me
I
too.
mean,
Me too.
he. I remember when it was my weekly Bond. That's how far back. You know, he was
Yes,
just doing
yes.
commentary and reviews on all the films, and even back then, I mean, he looked like, I mean, he still had spots. I mean, he was a really young guy. Like he looked like he was,
He
could have been
still
still
is
in high
young.
school. I mean, he's still young, but but back then he looked like he was in high school. Um,
Yes.
and I remember watching all his videos, and even when Mary and I mean, we were together at that point, and she would just hear his voice and coming from the living room, like, "Oh, you watching so and so again?" Yeah, yep. Um, but I remember even back then thinking like, wow, for a kid his age, he's got great insights. I mean, he really does. I mean, I was genuinely just kind of knocked out by just how thoughtful and insightful his stuff was. Um, so yeah, I mean, and so he's only gotten better. He's getting better and he's going stronger. So boy, God bless. I mean, every time he does a new video, where I feel like I'd be struggling to think of something new to say, he just makes it look easy. I mean, he just has really good thoughts and insights about every time he does something. So yeah, it's like again, I don't have any advice for these guys because they are just blowing it out of the
No,
water.
no, 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 no.
Yeah,
Those
I mean,
guys are a league of their own.
absolutely. I mean, they just incredible, and I'm just kind of constantly amazed at how often they put out really good content. I mean, and David, he's a machine. I mean, this I can't get over how often he's putting out stuff. I mean, if his full-time job was to do Bond material, I don't see how he'd be doing it better. I mean, he's
Yeah.
cranking out stuff so routinely, so regularly. No one ever has to say, "Hey, when are you putting out another video?" Because before you
No.
even ask, it's out. So
It's
yeah, I
like a
mean,
sausage machine.
it really is. It really is, and it's got good variety. I mean,
Hmm.
he's like from location stuff. Sometimes he's at the store, sometimes he's in London, sometimes he's in Jamaica. I mean, he's all over the place. So yeah, he keeps it interesting. He keeps it consistent. So yeah, I don't like again. I have nothing I can offer these guys because they're just doing a great job.
He's
Um,
really living the Bond experience. No
yeah,
pun intended.
100%. Yeah. And so as far as what the rest of us can be doing, I'm again not even sure because
No,
it's a tricky
it
world now.
is. It is a tricky world. So, listen, Joseph, I thank you very much to come up here and talk about this stuff that is Bond, and I appreciate your time. And when you're gonna get your royalty check from Ian because they took your being James Bond and made it a special.
I was just thrilled that I didn't get shut down. I thought for sure. I said, "Oh,
Yeah,
this is when I'm gonna start getting the letters. You gotta
and
cease and
the
desist."
lawyers.
Exactly. But no, I got off. So that was the best I could have hoped for.
That's right. All right. Once again, shameless plug, like I did to Bill last week. Where are you going to find you, Joseph?
I am wherever you can find podcasts, so Spotify, Apple iTunes, etc. And you can find Being James Bond on YouTube. And hopefully, by the time this comes out, I should have like something else new and exciting to put out. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm always on YouTube and wherever you find your podcasts.
Yeah, because like I said before, guys like Joseph, nice guy Bill Koenig, David Sarisky, and Calvin are true influencers. You hear that word so much on social media, but for
Yep.
me, this guy over here, David, Calvin, and Bill, are true influencers in the Bond community. They have their own style, they have their own opinion,
Yep.
and that's where I try to pick a little bit and be myself. I hopefully not going to compete with Calvin or David because that's another league, but I'll try to do my best. Once again, Joseph, thank you very much for coming on to the show, and hope to do this again, man. That was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. And I'm glad we got to do it. And I'm definitely looking forward to doing it again.
All right, guys, leave your comments in the part below, and we'll see you next time here on James Bond Television.